All right, now to make the saddle stitch book here, we are gonna start by taking some sheets of copy paper. Any 8.5, 11 or similar size will work great. It can be blank like this, or it can have textures or patterns, whatever you want. These are gonna be our inside pages. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna start with one page and we're going to fold it in half both directions. So we're gonna start by short side to short side. Like that. And then we're gonna unfold it and we're gonna do the long edge to the long edge. So now that we have our sheet folded both ways, we are going to do this to the remaining sheets that we want for the inside. Okay, so I did 8 sheets here for myself. You really can make however many you want. I recommend not doing more than 10 for a book of this size. Otherwise, the spine will start to get quite large and it's gonna have a hard time folding flat. So now that we have our sheets here, we are going to go ahead and cut them. We're going to cut them here along this middle seam. Now this doesn't have to be perfect. Inconsistencies are okay. So let's talk about some book terminology. So we have our book made up of individual pages. So this is a page, but if we take what we call a leaf, you'll notice that each of these overall sheets of paper, that's called a leaf, that has 4 individual pages on it. And our total book is made up of 16 leaves. In this total book here, when we stitch it on the edge and it's a bunch of pages folded on top of each other like this, that is called a signature. All right, so now that we have our book there, we are gonna go ahead and mark and punch our holes. So the way that we saddle stitch here is we punch 3 holes that we then can stitch through with our thread. So we're gonna go ahead. I recommend using like a pencil or mechanical pencil. I am going to use a marker just so that it shows up well on camera, making sure that we've aligned that spine. And we're going to mark on our first signature here. I'm just gonna make sure that each of my marks are about 2.5 inches from each other. So I'm centering my one in the center here, and then I'm gonna do 1.5 inches above that, and another 1.5 inches below that. Putting our pages in place, what some people will do is they'll take a binder clip and they'll actually clip the edges of their paper. That can be really handy when you're doing this punching because it keeps things from sliding around. I think if you're just making like one book and you're just learning, you don't need to be that precise. But if you are planning on making a large quantity of books, I highly recommend doing that. It really will save you. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our awl, and if you have an awl, you can just push down and twist through that paper. Just wanna make sure you're going through all the sheets. If you have a hammer and nail, it's just, like hammering through anything. You wanna set your nail there, gently tap the hammer through. It really doesn't take much force. I recommend a nail that has as, like sharp a point as possible. Some nails have a bit of a dull tip, and it doesn't have to be super wide. You actually only need a nail that's at least as wide as your needle. Now you want to check that the hole's punched all the way through. We are going to take our needle and thread now. Now for the thread, I find that for a book like this, I just make sure that it's 4 times the length of the spine here. So I'm just measuring out this thread 4 times. So now that I have that 4 times here, I'm going to do 1 more time. So I'm going to do a 5th. So I guess in total, yeah, I'm doing 5 times. I'm going to trim that off. Now, what we're gonna do is we're going to sew where we leave a tail. So go ahead and thread your needle. Now the way that we're going to use this thread here is we're not going to pull it all the way through. We're just going to leave a tail of a couple inches. And we're going to start stitching by going through the middle hole all the way to the outside and pulling our thread through. Again, you want to make sure that that tail stays and that we're not pulling it. And then we're going to pull all the way until the end of our thread leaves a couple inches at the end. So we'll leave another tail here on the inside. So now that our thread is going on the outside in the middle hole, we're going to go from the center hole to the top hole and go back through, making sure that we have our pages aligned. If you need to realign them, you can do that. I find holding it up to a light can work really well, because once you start seeing the light through, you'll know that the pages are aligned. Now I have pulled the thread through, so you'll see it goes through the center, out the back, and inside of the top. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our thread and we're going to go through the bottom hole. So we're going all the way across and through the bottom hole. Let me align my pages there again. Pull that thread all the way through, and you'll notice I'm just giving it a gentle tug to take up slack, but I'm not pulling it super stiff. Just enough to take any slack. Now that we have our thread coming out that bottom hole, we're going to go back through that hole in the middle, that starting hole. And now you'll see that we started in the middle hole and we've now ended also on that middle hole. So now what we're going to do is we are done with the needle portion. So I'm just going to pull the thread out of the needle, set the needle aside, make sure you don't lose it. We're going to use it again. And make sure that, it doesn't matter which side, but make sure we have one end of the thread on one side of this thread that's going across the middle and the other one on the other side. Because what we're going to do is we're going to tie a knot, and by having these on either side is actually going to catch this middle line going across in the middle of the knot, and it's going to reinforce the whole stitch. And I'm just giving it a couple knots. It's not too important the type of knot you use here, so whatever you're comfortable tying. I'm just going to do it enough so that I know it's not going to come loose. And now that my knot is ready, I'm just going to trim, just leaving about 1/8 of an inch left. Just like that. And now we have our saddle stitch or saddle bound book. Now we are going to make a book that's a little more complicated. This is a Japanese stab bound book. You'll see here I have a cover stock, so a thicker cover, and I have a sleeve on the end. So we're going to go through the stages of doing all of that, as well as making our sheets in the middle, where we're going to take our copy paper, and this time we're just going to fold it short end to short end. And now this time we're only going to fold it in half this one direction, and then we're going to cut along this line. So I'm going to go ahead and cut here. And stack. Short end to short end. Cut along my folded line. Now you'll notice that I am folding just using my hands, In bookmaking and print design, commonly people will use what is called a bone folder. That's because it was traditionally used from bone or made from bone. It's just a piece of generally plastic these days that have some beveled smooth edges, and it helps you get a really nice scored line. I find for this, using your fingers or the back of your nail works perfectly great. But if you do really get into bookmaking, it would be worth picking up a bone folder. The plastic variety are very easily found at your craft store, and they're very affordable. All right, I'm gonna do a couple more here. Now that I have my inside sheets, I'm just gonna mix them up a little bit so that the colored and decorated sheets are kind of randomly scattered throughout my book. And then this is gonna be my inside pages. So in this case, this is my leaf, and the leaf only has 2 pages. Because this is one whole page, and the other side, of course, is one whole page. So again, that terminology stays the same. You could call this a signature. Usually a signature is for a book that is folded over and stitched on the end. But if you were to combine this into a larger book, you still could call that a signature. So now that we have our inside pages done, let's go ahead and work at the cover. So you have a couple options. You could use, what I did here was I used some stiffer cardstock on both sides. You could use, like I mentioned, this sort of thicker handmade paper, or what I'm gonna use and what I recommend, or what I did in the supplies was just, like a cereal box. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut that apart so that I have one whole side here. All right, and I'm gonna leave this side up for tracing because I actually wanna have this be the outside of my book. If you wanna have the design from the cereal box, that's fine as well. Just make sure then that you are tracing on the inside for this. Now what I do is I just take one of my inside leaves, and you can use a ruler if you want, or just using the edge of this paper here, just trace the outline of your sheet. Doesn't have to be perfect. Some people will decide to actually have the cover be oversized. So they will have it so that it overlaps the inside pages. Here I'm making it flush, but either works. Now I'm gonna cut out that pattern. And now that I cut out one side, I can just trace that for the other. Here I'm making sure to trace on the side that's going to be facing inwards. Now I have 2 pieces, just about the same size. It's okay if it's a little bit off. If you wanted things to be a little less wavy like this, that's great. You can use, again, like an X-Acto knife. You could just redraw here, just trim this up with the scissors. Lots of options. I think it just adds character, so I'm gonna go with it. So now we have our outer covers and our inner book here. And one final thing is we have this decorative collar or edge here. And to do that, same steps as before. I'm going to use this paper. So I am just going about it like I'm making a single page. So here is, I got some cool designs on this side. gonna be a hard choice. So I'm just cutting it in half to make it the same size as one of the inside sheets. And now you have a choice. You can either just fold it in half, short end to short end, and fold it on, or if you want it even shorter, we can go ahead and do that. I think I'm going to cut it in half here and have it be half this width. So again, just fold it over. All right, that looks great. Making sure everything is lined up. We are now going to draw out the pattern for our stab bound book. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take just our top sheet here, and I'm going to set it back so that my ruler goes about 1/2 inch past that center line. So I'm just putting it over just about 1/2 inch. And now here we have, now if you did the 8.5 by 11 letter sheet and you folded it like I did, the height of this is gonna be about 5.5 inches. Now 5.5 inches divided by 6 is about 0.91 inches. So if you want to be really precise, you can mark that out. I'm going to go ahead and just eyeball it. So I'm going to go ahead and mark out my first one. So just about 0.90 would be right there. And now I'm just going to try to do that same spacing all the way down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So now I have my 6 holes here. Well, they will be holes. Right now they're just marks. Again, we're really just looking for equidistant. So you can eyeball it, you can measure out and be really particular, whatever you're most comfortable with. Now you'll notice again, here's the seam, or sorry, the fold, and then we put the marks in, because with this method, we're not actually bounding on the edge, we're binding a bit inwards, just like this. So now that we have our sleeve folded over, our pages lined up in the middle, and our covers, we're gonna go ahead and punch all the way through. Now, because we have this cardboard, you're gonna notice that it might be a little more difficult. So it might take a little bit more time to get all the way through. This is another place where if you put a binder clip here on the edge and here on this edge, that can hold these pieces together a little bit better. Now, while holding everything together, before you let it go, you want to flip it over. Make sure all your holes are punched all the way through, which they are on here. And now we are going to get our thread. Now this time we're going to want significantly more thread. So this time we're going to do 6 times the length of the whole book here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we're going to trim it. And now the same thing here, we are going to thread the needle, leaving just a couple inches of tail like we did for the saddle stitch. So here we are where we have it threaded on with about 4 or 5 inches of tail. And now we're going to start by going through the back side of the first hole, which is the top hole. So we're going from the back to the front of that top hole, and we're pulling the thread all the way through until we have just a little bit of an edge left on it. So see, we have a little bit of a tail coming out the back. And now we're gonna go around and back through that back hole. And we wanna make sure that when we pull this tight, that the thread loops over the top of the book here. So by going back around through the back, we've created a loop that captures the top of that book. Now we're gonna go around the side and back through the back of that same first top hole and pull out all of our slack. And now you'll see we have a loop going around the side. So now we're gonna go to the second hole. So I am starting from the top. This is the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth hole. So that's how I'm gonna refer to them. So we're starting on the second hole. We're going through the front. Pull your thread all the way through. And then we're going around the side, back through the front of the second hole. And pull all of the slack. And you'll see we've created another side loop here. Now that we're coming out of the back of the second hole, we're gonna go through the back of the third hole. Pulling up slack. Now that we're coming out of the front of the third hole, we're going to loop around the side and go back through the back of that third hole. This is gonna create the side loop on the third hole. And we're gonna keep continuing this pattern. So now that we have that side loop, we're gonna go down to the fourth hole, through the front. Now that we're coming out of the back, you'll see that the next step, because we don't have that loop, we have to create that loop. So we're gonna go around the front and back through the fourth hole. That's created the side loop. Now you'll notice that the lines here, some of them don't connect. Don't worry, we'll get to that at the end. Now that we're coming out of the back of the fourth hole again, we're gonna go to the fifth hole. So from the back to the front, all the way around the side, back through the back of the fifth hole. So that comes around the side there. And then we're gonna go through the front of the sixth hole. We are almost to the end. Now that we're coming out of the back of the sixth hole, you'll see we need that side loop. So we're gonna go around to the front, go back through the front of the sixth hole. Make sure our loop is on the side here, just like that. And now we need to go from the back of the sixth hole around to the front, and this time we're gonna do the loop on the bottom. See right there, the loop comes around the bottom. And now we are going to thread up to fill in these gaps on both sides. Now the way to do that is we'll just start from the sixth hole. We're coming out the back. We'll go through the back of the fifth hole. You'll see now that creates a line there. If we flip it over, now we go out of the 5th hole, we go into the 4th hole in the front, and we fill that gap in. We flip it over, we go from the 4th to the 3rd. Now we're just kind of following that pattern, going from one to the next. Now in the front here, you'll see we have to go from the 3rd to the 2nd. Just like that. And finally, we have to go from the 2nd to the 1st. Now, you will see that we have it almost finished. Now there's a couple ways to finish it. We can either just loop this back around and tie it off, or if you want it to be a little neater, if we take our thread, so it's coming out of the front of the 1st hole, if we loop under, we're just looping under this side loop here. That allows us to then go back through that 1st hole. And now we have both of the threads coming out of the back hole, so that all we have to do is tie these into a knot, and we will be done. I'm just going to tie a couple knots just so that as I use the book, it doesn't get worked loose. You can use whatever knot you'd like, whatever you're comfortable with. Trim off the end, just leaving about 1/8 of an inch. And we have our completed book. Now you'll notice with the stab bound book, we have our stiff cover and we have all of our sheets in here. If you wanted, you actually can score the cardboard here. So if you just use your ruler, put it there and run a bone folder or like a butter knife, something that's not going to cut through it, but will score it along that edge. That's going to create a natural fold so that the cardboard folds up easier. Otherwise, enjoy your stab bound book. All right, friends, I hope you had fun making these different books today. If you have any other questions or comments, you can always head us up at seattlerecreative.org. We have all sorts of classes. Make sure you come and check out our retail space where we have all sorts of reused materials, all that have been donated, ready for a new life of creativity. And I hope to get to create with you again. Thanks so much.